Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Powell, I want to start on the issue of diversity at the Fed. I have a letter that we sent you yesterday and signed by 9 senators, including 5 members of this committee, urging you to undertake a number of simple reforms to the process for selecting bank presidents and Class B directors. That process has to include meaningful transparency and public engagement if we are ever going to have Fed leadership that truly represents the public as required by the Federal Reserve Act. So I'll wait for your written response, because we just sent that letter, on the details of those proposed reforms. But for now, can I have your commitment that you'll provide us with a substantive response by July the 22nd?
Yes.
Thank you. And also, will you commit to work with me to put in place real, meaningful changes to the process so we can have a broader array of voices to the Fed leadership?
I'll commit to having a frank discussion with you about that and what could be. We're open to ideas to how to improve. As you point out in your letter, it's not like we haven't made tremendous strides as it relates to the B and C directors in the course of the last 10 years. We really have. And the diversity numbers are, I think, quite impressive for the B and C directors. The A directors, as you point out in your letter, less so, but those are appointed by the bankers in the district. But we can have this conversation.
Well,
I look forward to it.
Less so, but it's worse than less so. I mean, you don't have one bank president in the history of the Federal Reserve who's been Hispanic. That's far worse than less so.
I was talking about directors, but
Yeah.
you're right about that.
And there was a tremendous opportunity, and it didn't happen. I just continue. I feel like I'm the lone effort on this, but 62 million Hispanic Americans, who represent $2 trillion of domestic purchasing power, deserve a seat at where some of the most important economic decisions are being made. So we look forward to the engagement that you've said that you're willing to engage in. Now, I am trying to find out, as others have raised with you, there's no question that painfully high inflation is affecting every family in America. But in order to develop the right response, we need to understand the underlying factors that are driving price increases. I think you've said here today that Russia's invasion of Ukraine, pandemic-related supply chain issues are perhaps, and the energy issues that flow from Russia's invasion of Ukraine are perhaps some of the biggest factors in driving inflation. But the question is, how is it that raising interest rates on those underlying causes of today's inflation ultimately are going to change it? Energy is still energy. Supply chain is still supply chain. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is a continuing challenge for the world. But there's nothing about interest rates that's going to affect any of that.
No, but notwithstanding that, there are major parts of the economy where demand exceeds supply meaningfully, and that's where our tools have a job to do, where we can moderate demand and give supply time to recover so that supply and demand get back into better balance and inflation comes down.
Well, it seems to me that we can all recognize that raising interest rates is a blunt tool at the end of the day. But I'm looking, going back to the beginning of my questioning, it's essential, I believe, to be mindful of the effects that your actions, meaning the Federal Reserve, will have on unemployment, particularly for those groups that were hit hardest by the pandemic. The Fed's latest monetary policy report states that, quote, employment for blacks and Hispanics not only declined by more than that for whites and Asians early in the pandemic, but also recovered more quickly since the end of last year. Now that we're potentially entering a period of larger and more frequent interest rate increases, what do you expect will happen to the unemployment rates of black and Hispanic workers relative to the population as a whole?
Well, it'll depend on what happens to the overall unemployment rate. And our goal is to achieve 2% inflation while still keeping the labor market strong. That's our intention with this.
Well, I appreciate what your intention is, but I would venture to say that what we will see is what we have seen in the past, that crisis after crisis disproportionately harms Americans of color. So I hope the Fed's response to inflation doesn't continue that trend, because it is woefully wrong that one group of Americans disproportionately faces consequences of policy decisions versus the rest of America. And this is another reason to have people at the Federal Reserve who represent this community to share those insights with the Fed as you determine these macro policies that are going to affect our communities disproportionately.
Thank you, Senator Menendez.